Captain Ava Harris, a black female pilot, was just doing her job one ordinary day at the airport. She was preparing for her flight, walking through the terminal, and minding her own business. But then something unexpected happened. A woman, later called Karen, saw Ava and began to make loud, hurtful comments about her presence in the cockpit. Karen was openly frustrated and even angry that a black woman was in such a prestigious role. She seemed to think that someone like Ava didn't belong in the pilot's seat, despite Ava's years of hard work and dedication to her career. Ava, however, had faced moments like this before. She'd been called names, doubted, and treated as if she were less capable, just because of her race. But she always chose to rise above it. She didn't want to engage with Karen's hatred or ignorance, so she tried to ignore her. But Karen wouldn't stop. As the rude comments continued, they became louder and more personal. People nearby started to notice, and some of them began recording the scene. It was clear that Karen was angry, and her words were growing more vicious. The tension in the air was thick, and soon enough, things took a dangerous turn. Out of nowhere, Karen shoved Ava hard, pushing her backward. Ava stumbled a little but quickly regained her balance, trying to keep the situation from escalating any further. But Karen wasn't finished. In a shocking move, she punched Ava in the face. The sound of the punch echoed through the terminal, leaving the people around them stunned. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Ava stood there, her face in pain, but she didn't retaliate. She was taken aback, but she didn't let herself lose control. Onlookers gasped, some of them running to help, while others pulled out their phones to capture the shocking moment. Airport security immediately rushed to the scene and pulled Karen away. Ava, despite the physical pain from the punch, kept her composure. She didn't shout, and she didn't lose her temper, even though she was deeply hurt by the attack. She had been punched not just for being a woman, but for simply being a black woman in a place where some people didn't think she belonged. Ava was escorted to a private room, where she was quickly checked for injuries. Her lip was swollen, and there was a small bruise forming under her eye, but she was otherwise okay. Security started questioning the witnesses, and the police were called. It didn't take long for news of the attack to spread. The video of the punch went viral almost immediately, and it caused an uproar. People from all over the world were shocked by Karen's actions, and many were angry at how Ava had been treated. Social media was filled with support for Ava, with many people condemning Karen for her racist behavior. But the story wasn't over yet. The situation quickly went from a simple altercation to a nationwide conversation about racism, women's rights, and the struggles that people of color face in places where they're often judged by their appearance. Ava, a woman who had spent years fighting to break through barriers in her career, was now being thrust into the spotlight because of someone else's ignorance. But Ava wasn't the type of person to back down. She wasn't going to let the attack define her, even though it was a painful reminder of the prejudice she had fought against for so long. The story of the racist punch wasn't just about one woman attacking another. It was about the bigger issue of how racism affects people every day in ways that others may not even see. As people started to share the video, there was a sense of disbelief that something like this could happen in a public space, especially to someone as professional as Ava. This was just the beginning of what would become a much larger story, a story about standing up against hate, fighting for equality, and demanding respect for everyone, no matter their race or gender. After the punch, the airport turned into a scene of chaos. People were still in shock as they tried to process what had just happened. Ava, still reeling from the sudden attack, stood calmly as security moved in to handle the situation. Karen, the woman who had attacked her, was immediately grabbed by airport personnel and escorted away. The crowd that had gathered around started to murmur in disbelief, and many people rushed to check on Ava. Some passengers offered her words of comfort, while others looked on, not knowing how to react. Ava, though shaken, remained composed. Her face hurt from the punch, but she didn't let it show. She had been in situations before where she had to stay strong, even when people tried to tear her down. As security escorted Karen away, the situation seemed to calm down, but only for a moment. Ava's professionalism and grace under pressure were obvious, and she knew the incident wasn't over yet. It didn't take long for airport authorities to begin their investigation. They questioned everyone who had witnessed the attack, including those who had filmed the event. The video quickly spread across social media, and soon news outlets picked up the story. Ava's face, bruised from the punch, was all over the internet. It was hard to ignore the injustice of what had just happened. How could someone be so cruel simply because of Ava's race? The questions started to flood in, and soon the story was in the headlines of every news outlet. The video, which showed the shocking moment of the punch, went viral within hours. People from all over the world saw what had happened and began reacting. Many were horrified by Karen's behavior, while others took to social media to offer support for Ava. The comments came in fast. "This is not acceptable. Everyone deserves respect. And stand up for what's right." Ava's supporters flooded the internet with messages of love and encouragement, praising her for staying calm in the face of such a violent and racist attack. However, there were also those who defended Karen, questioning whether the incident had been as bad as it seemed or suggesting that maybe Ava had provoked the situation. But these voices were quickly drowned out by the overwhelming wave of support for Ava. Many people saw the punch not just as a personal attack, but as a symbol of the larger issue of racism that Black people, especially Black women, face every day. It was clear that what had happened to Ava was part of a much bigger problem, one that needed to be addressed. Ava herself took a few moments to process the event. She didn't let herself get caught up in the drama of the online debates. Instead, she focused on what was important: her own healing and the message she wanted to send to the world. Ava had always believed in the power of rising above negativity, and now was no different. She wanted to show everyone that no matter what happened, she would not let this act of violence define her. Ava had worked hard to get where she was, and she was determined not to let a single racist attack take that away from her. Behind the scenes, Ava was in contact with her legal team. She knew that there would be consequences for Karen's actions, but Ava also knew that she wanted to do more than just fight for justice in this one case. She wanted to bring attention to the everyday racism that so many people face, especially in professional spaces like aviation. It wasn't just about her. It was about changing the way the world saw people of color and women in the workplace. As the days went by, Ava started to feel the weight of the situation, but she also felt an overwhelming sense of support from people she didn't even know. Messages, phone calls, and emails came pouring in, all showing love and appreciation for her strength. It was clear that the incident was not just about one woman being punched. It was a turning point, a moment when people began to talk more openly about racism and the need for change. Ava's story was far from over, and the next steps would be just as important in bringing about that change. The incident quickly became a nationwide story, and the world was watching. People all over the country were horrified by the video of the punch, and many couldn't stop talking about it. Social media exploded with comments, both supportive and angry. The footage of Ava standing there, calm and composed despite the attack, touched many people. Some said they couldn't believe what they were seeing. How could anyone do something so violent to a woman just because of her skin color? But for every voice of support, there were also some that didn't understand. Some people tried to downplay what had happened, saying it wasn't as bad as it seemed or blaming Ava for provoking Karen. These voices, however, were quickly drowned out by the flood of messages backing Ava. Many people from all walks of life, celebrities, activists, everyday people, took to social media to share their thoughts and offer words of encouragement. Women's rights groups, civil rights activists, and people who had experienced racism themselves joined the conversation. Ava's calm in the face of such anger made her a symbol of strength for so many people. People began to speak out about their own experiences with racism, especially in public places and workplaces. For many, Ava's story was not just about one woman getting punched, but about a larger, more systemic issue: racism in the workplace, discrimination in public spaces, and the anger that people of color often have to face. Ava's experience was a painful reminder of the racism that still exists, but it also sparked a much-needed conversation about how to change things. Some well-known figures, like politicians and actors, came forward to express their outrage over the attack. They condemned Karen's actions and used the opportunity to talk about how far society still had to go in terms of racial equality. They pointed out how moments like these highlight the struggles that Black women in particular face every day. Ava wasn't just a victim of one punch. She had become the face of the fight for equality and respect in the workplace and beyond. One of the most powerful parts of the response was the support that came from fellow pilots. Women in aviation, a field that is still heavily male-dominated, rallied around Ava. They praised her not just for her professionalism, but for the strength she showed in such a challenging moment. Many pilots who had faced their own battles with discrimination sent messages of solidarity, telling Ava that they, too, had been doubted because of their gender or race. They told her that her courage had inspired them to keep pushing forward, no matter what obstacles came their way. Ava, though, was taking it all in with a level head. She wasn't just soaking in the praise or letting the support go to her head. She knew there was still a lot of work to be done. She understood that the attention she was receiving wasn't just about her personal story. It was about something bigger. She felt a responsibility now, not just to herself, but to everyone who had been affected by racism, sexism, and discrimination. Ava wanted to make sure this moment was used to create change, to have a deeper conversation about how people of color, especially women, are treated in public and professional spaces. Despite the emotional weight of the situation, Ava kept her focus. She refused to let the violence she'd experienced define her. Instead, she channeled her energy into advocating for more awareness and action against racism. As her story spread, Ava realized that this moment was much bigger than one airport incident. It was a moment to shine a light on an issue that was far too often ignored. She began receiving invitations to speak at conferences and forums, and the message was always the same: stand up against injustice, treat everyone with dignity, and keep pushing for equality. Ava knew that change wouldn't come easily or quickly, but she was ready to be a part of the solution. She wanted people to understand that racism wasn't something that only happened in extreme situations. It was a daily reality for many. And she wasn't going to stop until that reality started to shift. The support she received was overwhelming, but it also gave her the strength to keep moving forward. The fight for equality was far from over, but Ava was determined to make sure that every voice was heard, and that no one had to face what she had experienced ever again. As the news of Ava's attack continued to spread, the legal consequences for Karen became more serious. The assault was not just an isolated incident. It had become a symbol of the deeper racial issues that still exist in society. Karen, the woman who punched Ava, was arrested and charged with assault. But as the case moved through the legal system, the defense lawyers tried to paint a different picture. They argued that Karen's actions were not driven by racial hatred, but rather by frustration, claiming that she had been provoked in some way. This defense didn't sit well with the public. Many people saw right through the attempt to downplay the gravity of the situation. They pointed out that racism wasn't just about direct name-calling or explicit hate speech. It was the everyday microaggressions, the dismissive attitudes, and the violence that many people of color face on a daily basis. Karen's punch wasn't just a random act of aggression. It was a clear demonstration of how deeply ingrained racism can be. Ava, on the other hand, had a clear understanding of why this case was so important. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for the larger cause. She knew that if she didn't speak out, if she didn't demand justice, this kind of behavior would continue. The assault on her wasn't just about the pain she'd suffered, but about what it represented. So when it was time for Ava to take the stand in court, she was ready. Her testimony was powerful. Ava spoke from the heart about her life as a black woman in a career where women of color were rarely seen. She shared the struggles she had faced, the doubts that had been cast on her abilities simply because of her race and gender. Her words rang out in the courtroom, and it was clear that she wasn't just talking about that one moment in the airport. She was addressing a larger issue that affected millions of people every day. She talked about the microaggressions she had faced throughout her career, the subtle but hurtful comments that had made her feel less than her white counterparts. Ava was not just a pilot. She was a trailblazer, one of the few black women in her field. Yet, despite her talent and achievements, she had often been overlooked, dismissed, and even ridiculed. This attack wasn't just a personal assault. It was a reflection of the barriers that black women like her had to overcome in order to succeed. The courtroom was silent as Ava spoke. Her words were raw and honest, but they were also filled with a quiet strength. Ava wasn't angry. She was simply stating the truth. And as she told her story, the jury listened closely. It was clear that Ava wasn't just a victim in this situation. She was a voice for change, a representative of everyone who had been mistreated because of their skin color or gender. The prosecution, which had been carefully preparing its case, highlighted the racial elements of the attack. They showed the video of Karen's aggressive behavior, pointing out how it was fueled by prejudice. This was no ordinary assault. It was a racist attack on a woman simply trying to do her job. The prosecution also pointed out that Ava's calm and composed response in the face of violence showed just how deeply ingrained her professionalism was, and how she refused to let Karen's hatred get the better of her. As the trial went on, it became clear that the public was invested in the outcome. People followed the proceedings closely, and many attended the trial, waiting for the final verdict. Ava's testimony had sparked a conversation that was much larger than just one incident. It had become a turning point in the fight against racism. The question wasn't just about whether Karen would be punished. It was about how society was going to address the bigger issue of racial discrimination. The case eventually ended with Karen being found guilty of assault, but the legal consequences were just one part of the story. What was more important was the conversation that had begun as a result of Ava's bravery. People were talking more openly about racism, and more people were beginning to understand the struggles that black women face every day. The legal system had played its part, but the battle for true equality was far from over. Ava knew that this was just the beginning, and she was ready to continue fighting for change. The aftermath of the attack wasn't easy for Ava. While she had become a symbol of strength and resilience, the emotional toll of the incident was something that couldn't be ignored. On the outside, she looked like she was handling everything well. Her career was moving forward, and she had a strong support system behind her. But deep down, the pain from that day at the airport lingered. The punch, though physically healed, left emotional scars that Ava hadn't expected. Despite her professional success, Ava had spent years fighting for respect in a field that was still dominated by white men. As one of the few black women in aviation, she had been used to being overlooked and doubted. But the attack brought back all of those feelings of being dismissed and unwanted. It made her question whether her years of hard work and perseverance had been enough to overcome the deep-seated prejudices in society. Ava didn't want to admit it, but she felt vulnerable in a way she hadn't before. Her friends and family, knowing how strong and driven she was, encouraged her to take time off, to rest, and to focus on her own well-being. But Ava couldn't bring herself to do it. She had spent so long proving herself to the world, and she wasn't about to let one attack stop her from pushing forward. She couldn't afford to slow down, not when there was still so much work to do. Taking time off would mean giving in to the hate that had been thrown her way, and Ava wasn't about to let that happen. She knew that if she didn't keep moving forward, if she didn't continue to fight for a better future, then the hateful actions of people like Karen would have won. But while Ava was determined not to let the attack stop her, she couldn't deny the emotional toll it had taken. She began to feel the weight of the pressure she'd been carrying for so long. She had been the first black woman in many spaces, and that meant she had to constantly prove herself. The constant battle to be seen, to be heard, was exhausting. Ava began to experience feelings of burnout and fatigue. It was hard to keep up the fight day after day, especially when she was still dealing with the aftermath of the attack. To cope with these feelings, Ava started therapy. At first, she was hesitant. She had always been strong, always relied on herself to get through difficult situations. But the attack had made her realize that it was okay to ask for help, that seeking support wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a sign of strength. In therapy, Ava was able to talk about her feelings of anger, sadness, and frustration. She could finally express the pain that she had been holding inside for so long. The therapy sessions weren't easy, but they helped Ava process her emotions and start healing in a way she hadn't been able to before. As Ava worked through her feelings, she also began to reflect on her career and the path she had taken. She thought about the many times she had been told she wasn't good enough, the times she had been passed over for promotions or ignored during meetings because of her race and gender. It wasn't just Karen who had made Ava feel small. It was a pattern she had encountered her entire career. But the attack had made her realize just how much strength she had built over the years. She had been through so much, and yet she had continued to rise. The fact that she had reached the position she was in was proof of her resilience. As Ava started to heal, both emotionally and mentally, she felt a growing sense of purpose. The support from people around the world had helped her see that she wasn't alone in this fight. Her story had inspired so many, and that gave her the strength to keep going. She realized that, in a way, the attack had pushed her to take a closer look at her own journey. It had reminded her of the importance of self-care and the need to continue advocating for herself and others. Slowly but surely, Ava began to speak out more about the emotional and psychological toll that racism can have. She wanted to make sure that others who were dealing with similar challenges knew they weren't alone. Ava's openness about her struggles began to inspire even more people, especially young Black women who were trying to break into fields where they were often told they didn't belong. Ava became a voice for change, not just for racial equality in the workplace, but for mental health awareness, too. Through it all, Ava never lost sight of her ultimate goal: to break down the barriers for future generations of women of color in aviation. The attack had hurt, but it had also sparked something in her. Ava knew that the fight wasn't over, and she was ready to keep pushing forward, not just for herself, but for everyone who needed a voice in the fight against discrimination. As the weeks passed, Ava's story continued to echo through the news and social media, but she was focused on what came next. The public's reaction had been overwhelmingly positive, and Ava knew she had a unique opportunity to create lasting change. She had already inspired so many with her strength and resilience, but now it was time to take the next step and use her platform for something bigger. She began to think about the future, not just her own, but the future of every Black woman who dreamed of following in her footsteps. One of the first things Ava did was to start speaking out more about the need for diversity in aviation. She knew that the industry she worked in, while incredible, had a long way to go in terms of representation. Women of color were still a rarity in the cockpit, and Ava wanted to change that. She began partnering with organizations that work to encourage young women, especially women of color, to pursue careers in aviation. Ava spoke at schools, community centers, and aviation camps, sharing her story with young girls who needed to see someone who looked like them in a position of power and influence. Her message was clear: you belong. It didn't matter where you came from or what others told you. You could achieve anything if you put in the work and believed in yourself. Ava made sure to emphasize the importance of not letting anyone, no matter how harsh or racist their words might be, stop you from reaching your dreams. She spoke about her own struggles, how she had to fight for respect in every step of her career. Ava encouraged these young women to be strong, to push through adversity, and to never give up, no matter the obstacles in their way. As she traveled to different schools and communities, Ava noticed something powerful. The more she spoke, the more young women started to believe in their own potential. Many of them had never seen someone who looked like them in such a prestigious role, and that made all the difference. Ava was not just teaching them about aviation. She was showing them that their dreams were valid, that their goals were attainable. It wasn't just about becoming a pilot. It was about believing that they were capable of anything, no matter the field. But Ava's impact wasn't limited to the young girls she met. Adults, too, reached out to express their gratitude for her courage and leadership. Some had been in the workforce for years and had never seen someone like Ava stand up for their rights, while others shared their own stories of discrimination and bias. Ava became a role model for anyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough because of their race or gender. Her work was beginning to reshape the way people thought about diversity, not just in aviation, but in every industry. Ava also began working on creating mentorship programs specifically designed for women of color in aviation. These programs would connect experienced pilots with young women who were just starting their journey. The goal was to give them the support, guidance, and encouragement they needed to succeed in an industry where they often felt isolated. Ava wanted to make sure that these women had a network of people who could help them navigate the challenges they would face. She knew how difficult it could be to break through barriers without support, and she didn't want anyone to have to go through what she had. In the midst of all her work, Ava was also taking steps to improve the way the aviation industry handled issues of discrimination. She began working with aviation companies and organizations to create stronger policies around diversity and inclusion. She pushed for better training for flight crews and airport staff on handling racism and microaggressions. Ava wanted to make sure that future generations of pilots, especially women of color, would have an easier time than she did. She knew that change wouldn't happen overnight, but she was determined to be part of the solution. Through her tireless advocacy and her continued work in aviation, Ava became a leader in the fight for racial equality. The pain of the punch that had once left her broken and questioning had transformed into a driving force for change. Ava had turned a moment of hate into a movement of empowerment. She had learned that one person could make a difference, and now she was proving it. She had become not only a successful pilot, but also a powerful voice for change, encouraging people everywhere to stand up against racism and to fight for a world where everyone could succeed, no matter their background. The impact of her journey was far-reaching. Ava's story wasn't just about an attack. It was about what happened afterward, the conversations it sparked, the people it inspired, and the change it started. And through it all, Ava remained committed to her mission. She knew that she had the power to shape the future, and she wasn't going to stop until she had done everything she could to make the world a more inclusive, equal place for everyone. As Ava's journey continued, her impact began to spread even further. The work she had done in aviation was important, but the conversations she sparked were now reaching other industries and communities. People were beginning to realize that the issues Ava had faced weren't isolated to just one career or one city. Discrimination, racism, and sexism were problems that affected many people in many different fields. Ava's bravery and leadership had opened doors for people to talk about these issues more openly, and her voice had become a powerful tool for change. One of the most significant moments in Ava's journey came when she was invited to speak at a major conference on diversity and inclusion. The event was attended by leaders from various industries, including education, business, and healthcare. Ava knew that this was a rare opportunity to expand the conversation beyond just aviation. She had already made a difference in her field, but now it was time to take the lessons she had learned and share them with the world. During her speech, Ava didn't just talk about the difficulties she had faced as a Black woman in aviation. She talked about the bigger picture, how racism, discrimination, and inequality affected every part of society. Ava spoke about the importance of representation in all fields, from the boardroom to the classroom. She emphasized that diversity wasn't just about checking boxes. It was about creating environments where people of all backgrounds could thrive and succeed. She explained that true inclusion meant acknowledging the challenges people faced because of their race or gender and taking active steps to make changes. Ava's words were powerful, and the audience listened intently. Her speech became a catalyst for action. The conference organizers decided to form a task force dedicated to addressing the issues Ava had highlighted. They wanted to find ways to make their industries more inclusive, and they invited Ava to be a part of it. She didn't hesitate to accept the offer. Ava knew that real change wouldn't happen by talking about the issues once and then moving on. It would take sustained effort, commitment, and collaboration from people across all sectors. By joining the task force, Ava was able to help create concrete solutions that would make a real difference in the lives of people who had been marginalized for too long. The work on the task force was demanding but rewarding. Ava collaborated with leaders from various fields to develop new policies that focused on improving representation and creating supportive environments for people from underrepresented groups. They worked on initiatives like mentorship programs, diversity training, and ensuring equal opportunities for career advancement. Ava's firsthand experience with discrimination made her a valuable voice on the task force. She didn't just talk about what needed to be done. She also provided practical suggestions based on her own experiences of overcoming obstacles. The task force's efforts soon began to show results. Companies started to implement more inclusive hiring practices, schools started to focus more on creating diverse curricula, and organizations began offering better support systems for employees from marginalized backgrounds. The progress was slow, but it was real. Ava could see the changes happening, and it filled her with a sense of purpose. The work she had started in the wake of that one attack had turned into something much larger than she had ever imagined. Ava was helping to build a future where people of all races, genders, and backgrounds could thrive without fear of discrimination or bias. As Ava continued her work, she was also recognized for her efforts. She received awards for her contributions to diversity and inclusion, and people from all walks of life thanked her for the impact she had made on their lives. But Ava didn't let the accolades distract her. She remained focused on her mission. She knew that the work wasn't done yet, and that there were still many barriers to break down. Through it all, Ava found strength in the people she had met along the way, people who shared her vision of a more inclusive world. Her supporters, her fellow pilots, and the young women she had mentored all reminded her of why she had started this journey in the first place. Every step she took, every person she helped, brought her one step closer to her ultimate goal. Ava knew that the fight for equality wasn't just about breaking barriers for herself. It was about paving the way for the generations to come. By the time Ava looked back at everything she had accomplished, she was filled with pride. What had started as a painful moment of violence had turned into a powerful force for change. Ava had shown that even in the face of hate, there was strength, resilience, and hope. She had not only survived the attack, but had used it to inspire a movement that would continue long after she was gone. Ava had turned her pain into purpose, and in doing so, she had changed the world.